And good morning once again, my brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ at Living Hope Community Church, at Iglesia Esperanza Viviente, and throughout the world. What a great privilege it is for me to be with you once again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for studying God's Word with me. We find ourselves in Luke's Gospel today, chapter 23, and we've been looking at this last week of Jesus' earthly life. We've been looking at his regal entrance on the back of a colt as he hears the people shout Hosanna, and they lay palm branches before him. We've watched him as he's cleansed the temple. We've seen him teach for a few days, Wednesday and Thursday of that week in the temple, but then he has shared the last official Passover meal with his disciples and instituted the Lord's Supper. Judas has gone to betray him. He goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. This is about midnight Thursday night. We're now entering into the Passover day. Jesus is arrested in the garden and taken before the Judaic judicial system. Now, they're not supposed to have trials at night, but they are so animated when it comes to killing Jesus that they don't pay attention to their rules. They're ready to kill him right now, which, while they think they're doing something expediently before the crowd can figure it out, God all the while has his timetable in force, and even the forces of evil are going to comply with God's timetable. Jesus will be crucified on Friday afternoon. He will suffer and die as the Holy Lamb of God, the only one that takes away the sin of the world. He will suffer at the right time in the right place according to God's schedule, even though these evil forces think that they're the ones controlling events. It's such a profound truth. But today we're going to start by looking at the trial of Jesus and just the phases. We were looking at the first three phases, and we'll see the fourth phase this morning. You remember that he goes before the Judaic leadership after his arrest. Peter is denying him in this part of the phase. There, the chief priests, the scribes, and the Sanhedrin are gathered. It's called the whole council. The Sanhedrin is going to be about 71 people. The leaders, basically, these guys are the elite of Israel. They're ones that are economically superior in so many ways, and they think themselves to be educationally superior. They hold this at the middle of the night, as I mentioned, which violates one of the basic rules, especially in a capital punishment trial where you have to do it in the daylight, is their tradition, is their Judaic principle. But no, they abandon that. And Jesus is condemned on the charge of blasphemy. He's calling himself the Son of God. Now, they have a real problem here. Okay, he's condemned on blasphemy, but Pilate is the Roman governor, and Pilate is the guy that has the power to exercise capital punishment. They don't have the power, and they know it. So now how are they going to get Pilate to agree to execute Jesus for blasphemy? What possible weight does blasphemy hold to a Roman emperor appointee, to a guy that, he's a pagan. He doesn't care about blasphemy. But still, they have to send him to Pilate because they have to get the Roman authority behind the idea that they're going to kill Jesus. So they go before Pilate. They're accusing him of many things. They say, well, he's misleading our nation. He's forbidding taxes being paid to Caesar. And he's calling himself the Christ. That's the one that really has us. But maybe you'll be more encouraged to kill him if you think he's trying to lead a rebellion by misleading our nation, or maybe you think he's trying to keep us from paying our taxes. Maybe you'll be more exercised to crucify him than Pilate. Well, what does Pilate do? He listens to Jesus, he talks to Jesus, and he says, hey, I don't find any guilt in this guy. I don't see any reason to kill this guy. But the Jews are unrelenting. They continue to accuse Jesus. They continue to question Pilate and say, basically, would we bring him before you if he wasn't guilty of something? Basically, like, you're calling us liars because you don't want to kill this guy. We want to kill this guy. And so you need to get on board, Pilate, or you're going to face some sort of radical response from the Jewish people, which is going to get you in trouble with your Roman authorities back in Rome. You don't need a rebellion here. If all it takes to keep everything smooth is to kill this one guy, who cares? Who cares if it's even just? Let's get rid of him. Well, Pilate, he does what? He remembers that as they accuse Jesus, they're accusing that he did all these bad things in Palestine and in Galilee. And when he's told Galilee, Pilate says, oh yeah, well that's where Herod is the ruler. Let me send Jesus to Herod. Now Herod happens to be in town for the Passover. He's in Jerusalem. So when we send Jesus to Herod, we're not sending him all the way to the Sea of Galilee or someplace up north like that. We're sending him across the town to where Herod stays. Okay, so just to review, Pilate says to the chief priests and the crowds, I find no guilt in this man. If you study the Gospels, you'll see that Pilate tells the Jewish people 3 times, I find Jesus to be not guilty, but they were urgent, saying he stirs up the people. He's causing a rebellion. You don't want to have a revolution here, do you, Pilate? He's teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place. So that's when Pilate wakes up to the idea that he can send Jesus to Herod. Then Pilate heard this. He asked whether the man was a Galilean. When he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time. Now, there's something we need to cover here. I hope you don't get bored with me, but when you see somebody named Herod in the New Testament, you need to pay attention. We all do. Why? Well, let me show you. In the New Testament, you find several different Herods. There's Herod the Great. That's his nickname, I guess. He's the guy that rebuilt the temple that Jesus ministers in. He's also the guy that was so threatened when the wise men came to tell him that there was a king born. He killed the babies. Remember in Matthew 2? That's that Herod. He dies early on, and Jesus comes back from Egypt. Joseph and Mary bring him back to settle in Nazareth to grow up. Well, this Herod the Great, he has kids. The first son is Herod Archelaus. He rules over Judea. In fact, Herod the Great wills these regions to his sons upon his death, that they would take over certain regions. But Herod Archelaus, he only lasts about 10 years. He's ruthless. If you read his history, there's a rebellion where he ends up killing like 3,000 people. He doesn't make it. He's only mentioned once in all the New Testament, and that's Matthew 2:22. But then Herod's second son is called Herod Antipas. Now this guy is also nicknamed Tetrarch, which means he's the fourth. But in the end, he's managing an area known as Galilee and Perea, and this is where Jesus has been ministering throughout his ministry. Well, Herod Antipas is the second son of Herod the Great. But you can see already, now we're up to 3 Herods, and all 3 have been mentioned in the Bible by the name Herod. Then there's another one called Herod Philip. That's the third son. He was relegated to the area east of the Jordan to rule over that upon Herod the Great's death. Then Herod the Great has a grandson named Herod Agrippa. He's in Acts chapter 12. He's the one that persecutes the church but ends up dying because he won't acknowledge God and calls himself as great as God. But again, here's another guy named Herod in the New Testament. And then Herod the Great has a great-grandson named Herod Agrippa II, which is found in Acts 25 and 26. So now, when you think about Herod in the New Testament, you need to be sure you understand which Herod you're talking about. And when we're in Luke 22 or 23, and Pilate sends Jesus to Herod, which Herod is he sending him to? Well, before we get to that question, let me tell you this. Herod Antipas, the second son, the one that's called the Tetrarch of Galilee, he ends up going to Rome, and in a meeting in Rome, he finds his brother, well, it's really his half-brother, Philip. He starts hanging out with Philip, but he also starts hanging out with Philip's wife. Her name is Herodias. Well, it turns out that Herod Antipas sort of takes a fond view of his half-brother Philip's wife, And she likes him too. So what do? They decide to divorce their spouses. Herod Antipas comes back from Rome and tells his wife, you need to get out of here because I'm taking Herodias to be my wife. And Herod Philip also receives the news that his wife is leaving him to be Herod Antipas's wife. Why is all that important? Well, if you read the Gospels, Matthew 14, you'll see that Herod Antipas is a guy that arrests John the Baptist. And the reason he arrests him is because John the Baptist keeps telling Herod Antipas that he has no legal right to be married to Herodias. He has violated God's law and he will be condemned for it. He keeps preaching judgment to the king. Well, the king arrests him, but if you remember the story, Herodias doesn't think that's enough. They have a banquet. The daughter of Herodias does this great dance, and Herod's so impressed, he says, what do you want? I'll give you half my kingdom. She confers with her mother Herodias, and Herodias says, oh, here's what I want. I want the head of John the Baptist. This guy that keeps telling us we're wrong, let's kill him. And of course, that's what Herod does. He kills him. Well, that leads to some paranoia on Herod's part, which we'll see in a second. But just understand, when we're talking that Pilate sends Jesus to Herod, we're talking about this Herod Antipas, okay? The one who's in Galilee, the Tetrarch. In fact, in Luke 9, now Herod the Tetrarch, that's the clue, the Tetrarch, that's the clue that it's the son of Herod the Great, the one who rules over Galilee and that region. Herod the Tetrarch heard about all that was happening, and he was perplexed because it was said by some that John had been raised from the dead. Originally, Herod thinks that Jesus is John resurrected. By some that Elijah had appeared. That's another idea of who Jesus is. And by others that one of the prophets of old had risen. So Herod knows that Jesus is doing miraculous things, and his guilt is starting to turn to paranoia as he wonders who this Jesus is. And Herod says, John I beheaded, but who is this about whom I hear such things? And he sought to see him. All right, back to Luke. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad. Okay, he's been wondering about Jesus for quite a while. Now you got to remember, this is the ruler. He gets what he wants, he does what he wants, and everybody obeys him, right? So he's about to see Jesus, for he had long desired to see him because he had heard about him. He was hoping to see some sign done by him. Hey, Jesus, can you do one of those tricks for me? I want to see one of those miracles I've heard about. He's intrigued. He's not going to believe, but he's intrigued. So here comes Jesus with the Jews right behind to say, we want to kill him. And so Herod questions him at some length. But here you see a line that's just profound. But he made no answer. What are you talking about? You know, Herod holds the life or death of Jesus in his decision. And Jesus doesn't want to say a word. Why would Jesus not respond when this guy Herod is asking him? I mean, Herod's got to be shocked, right? I'm interrogating you in a life and death situation, and you won't speak. You know, we go 700 years back to the writing of Isaiah. He was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Jesus refuses to entertain the conjectures of this evil king. I'm not going to say a word to you. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Jesus fulfills Scripture. So what happens? Well, the chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. We got to kill this guy, Herod. We got to kill this guy, Pilate. Let's kill this guy. Again, both of these Roman leaders are considering what's going to happen if they have a rebellion in Palestine and they have to answer to Rome for that rebellion. That's in the back of their minds. There's more history here, but for time's sake, we won't cover it all. And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. Again, just think of this. Treated him with contempt. There's a lot more to it than just, oh, we don't like you. They're beating him. They're mocking him. They're attacking him. The Lord of glory is receiving blows to the face. He's being spit on. He's being mocked horrendously. We've already seen that in the trial that the Jews had for Jesus. Now we see it again. And now they dress him up. Oh, you're a king? Okay, let's get you all dressed up. And we're going to send you back to Pilate. Herod refuses to issue a guilty verdict for Jesus and passes him back to Pilate. It's interesting. Jesus is going back and forth between these Roman leaders, and we're just waiting for one of them to step up and say, I'm going to appease the Jewish leadership by doing what they want. I'm going to kill him. We'll see that next time. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. For before this, they had been at enmity with each other. There's a long story to why Herod and Pilate were not friends, but nonetheless, if we have your enemy, if we have a common enemy, we can be friends. And now they have a common problem. They're being asked to execute an innocent guy. They're being asked to appease this crazy, out of control Jewish mob, which calls itself Jewish leadership, in order to kill Jesus. This is the ultimate rejection of the Lord by his people. The ultimate rejection. They go to Pilate and oppose Jesus. Now they go to Herod and oppose Jesus. They are trying to find a way to kill him. Understand this. The Lord is the judge. While these people are working on how to judge him, we know that eternally speaking, he judges all of us. The point for us, bow before him today while you have time. Serve him now. Today's the day of salvation. And notice how the Lord suffers. He suffers in silence. He doesn't need to answer his accusers. He doesn't need to prove his innocence, because he knows that God's plan is being fulfilled and that God ultimately, sovereignly controls all of history, and that God will bring his purposes to pass. I pray God blesses you, church. Serve him well today.
Who is it who for sinners shed his blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus. But do you know who he is? He's the image of the invisible God, and he's the brightness of his glory. The first, the last, the future, the past. He is God.